Hi, I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. We are reaching the end of 2024, and I, as so many here on BookTube, am now going to present my 24 most enjoyed books that I read in 2024. Why 24? Because it's 24 and 24, of course. Humans are weird. We like numbers that just are either round or have puns in them. I am presenting these books in chronological order. And the first book I want to present that I absolutely loved is Atiq Rahimi's A Curse on Dostoevsky. Now, this is a retelling of Crime and Punishment, but based in Afghanistan during one of their million wars. I picked this up because I'm doing a project of reading a book from each country of the world, and I didn't really felt like the book I picked for Afghanistan fit, so I wanted to read something else from Afghanistan. So, considering that this is a retelling of Crime and Punishment of Dostoevsky, I then, of course, had to read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And on one hand, I think I actually should have read Crime and Punishment first and then read A Curse on Dostoevsky, but it was very enjoyable nonetheless. So, Crime and Punishment is a book about a young man who has just killed someone. And then the entire book is about his reflections around his own morality. His trying to explain what is good, what is not good, what is right. Should he hand himself in? Should he not? Was it right for him to do this murder? Was it not right for him to do this murder? And of course, Dostoevsky is here sort of writing a book that places his writing in a larger context of discussing morality. So a book about Crime and Punishment is very much a book that tries to explore what humanity is in regarding to us as moral creatures. And this is also very clearly reflected in this book. But what Atiq Rahimi does is that he doesn't focus so much about the morality and the murders and the ethics, but he uses a similar events to reflect on Afghanistan in regarding to their censorship, who is allowed to be especially translated literature, what literature are you gaining access to, what literature is published, translated. And in that sense, he does sort of a similar exploration of what does it mean to be human, except with the light of art and literature instead of morality. So, brilliant book, but you should read Crime and Punishment first to really understand how brilliant this book is. Kim Stanley Robinson, Red Mars. This is a science fiction book, and it's about the first group that is traveling to Mars as settlers. And what I really enjoyed about this, he, of course, is using this as a way of discussing politics, to make this not a battleground for war, and to make it sort of even. There are very strict rules on what nationalities the different characters can be from. Of course, based on when this book was published. This book was published in the year, I should have looked this up before we went, it was published in 1992. So, of course, the politics was very different, which is reflected, but you can sort of see the idea behind it, and can also easily then translate it to any time throughout history. And what he does so brilliantly is the interactions between the different characters. Because one thing is about what nationality each of the characters have, but we're not just a nationality. We have temperaments, we have personalities, we have interest, we have what we are driven by, what we are motivated by. And he creates such a wonderful gallery of characters, and the way they interact with one another, that really explores what it means to be part of a society, and what it means to create a society and develop a society. Because society just means interactions between individuals. The next book I want to talk about as a favorite in 2024 is Gabriel Marquez Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera. Now, I absolutely enjoyed this book so much, but I am open for me enjoying this book because I misread it. So the book is about a young man who falls head over heels in love for a woman, and the woman then marries someone else, and he spends his life pining for her. Now, the reason why I enjoyed the book so much is that I very much read that relationship as something negative, that he pining after her wasn't necessarily a good thing. It wasn't romantic, wasn't meant to be romantic. She was happily married to someone else. Why was he bothering her? And you can also see that, for example, in just the title with Love in the Time of Cholera, which made me think about tuberculosis, which is an illness that was very heavily romanticized during, especially the Romantics in Europe, where tuberculosis was very much the disease that poor innocent women who are too pure for this cold world would die from. Tuberculosis can also be called the consumption. And by calling it Love in the Time of Cholera, he's sort of turning this idea on its head. But please sort of tell me if you think that I have interpreted that book wrong, because I'm open for that. The next book on my list is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, I think. And this is about a coffee shop where you can have a cup of coffee and go back in time. Now, I would say that this is more of a fantasy than a science fiction, because it's never explained what it is that makes you be able to go back in time, but it seems more magical than any scientific thing. So what I really enjoyed about it is that it's such a small story, and I don't mean that as something negative, but you can go back in time, but you have to stay at the cafe. You can't move. So it's very limited what you are able to do going back in time. So there are no high stakes. You're not going back or forth through history as a warning or as an inspiration of what society can and cannot be. These are just individuals who are able to see something that is important for them as an individual. And this is a small book in the sense that you're only in this one location. And it becomes, therefore, quite an intimate book. So absolutely wonderful. And I'm looking forward to reading the other books in the series, because I know it's a series. I'm very late to that party. I know it's been a popular book for some time now. My next favorite book is Barbara Kingsolver's The Poisonwood Bible. This is about a family who travels to Congo to be missionaries. And right from the get-go, you do get that something is off. Because the father who travels to be a missionary travels against the church, in a sense. He isn't asked to be a missionary. And on the contrary, when he says to the church that I want to be a missionary, they're like, why? Are you sure? So right from the get-go, you do get that there is something sort of off with this father. And then when they go to Congo, what you see is that he has absolutely not been prepared for what he's going to do. So he is sort of mucking around. And that's also where the title comes from, the Poisonwood Bible. It's actually a mistranslation he makes by then sort of calling the Bible something else, because he hasn't learned the language, and he doesn't think that learning the language is important. So Barbara Kingsolver was raised by two doctors who worked as, not missionaries necessarily in Africa, but who worked as doctors, as volunteers in Africa. And while you absolutely can then read this book as a critique of missionary work specifically, what I saw when reading this book, or what I interpreted when reading this book, was more the critique of lack of understanding of the culture that you are forcing yourself into, regardless of what you want to do in this new culture. If that is creating a business, if that is doing volunteer work or missionary work, and how important it is to respect the people that you are talking to. Yes, even if they come from a different cultural background than you. So I think that this book can absolutely be interpreted as talking more about cultures meeting than missionaries specifically. But it's a brilliantly written book, regardless of that. Especially that it focused so much on, this is a family of a father and a mother and 4 daughters, and they are quite young when they travel for the first time. The next book I want to talk about is Jon Fosse. So in 2023, Jon Fosse won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and that made me more inspired of reading more of his work often again, because I had a period when I was in my teenage years where I read a lot of his plays, and now I wanted to read more of his novels. And I read Morning and Evening by Jon Fosse. It's quite a small book, and it's a very simple story with, you have the first part of the story with a father who is watching his son being born. And the second part is about a man reflecting on his life on his deathbed. And what is implied is, of course, that these are the same person. This is the same character, even if it is not quite directly written out. And Jon Fosse is one of these wonderful authors who can really tell a story by nothing happening. That might sound weird, but if you read Jon Fosse, you will understand what I mean. And because it has something to do with, he focuses a lot on reflection. He focuses a lot on thinking back, what is going on? What do I feel? What is really happening? Even if there isn't much plot happening. And what he then does is that he brings out such wonderful room for you to reflect, for you to think about, well, what did I think that my parents were thinking when I was born? I was the firstborn. I was the first child that my parents had, and made me think, so what kind of dreams did they have for me? What ideas did they have about what kind of life I would be leading? And when I'm on my deathbed, what kind of life will I then be thinking back on? What parts of my life would I be thinking back on? What kind of regrets would I have? Or would I really focus on my regrets? So Jon Fosse, by his meditative writing, invites you to meditate. And that's sort of his project in a lot of his writing. So if you want to sort of dip your toe into Jon Fosse, because some of his other works can be quite daunting, I am now currently working on reading Septology, which is absolutely chef's kiss up until now, but is like this big. So if you want to sort of take a feel around, then Morning and Evening by Jon Fosse is a way of sort of understanding if he is your cup of tea or not. The next book I want to talk about is Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Half of the Yellow Sun is a book where she talks about the Nigerian liberation. It's about three people who, two of them are sisters. One is a white person who happens to work in Nigeria at the time. And then the Liberation War happens. And conflict. Because who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who says what to whom? Is this what we want our country to be? And if you followed on the discussions that are now happening regarding Syria, you will get quite a good impression of the discussions that she is presenting. Becoming an independent country is hard. Becoming a democracy is hard because there are so many things you have to figure out. What's our laws? What kind of country will we be? I mean, even a democratic country is still so vastly different from one another. So there's so many things that you have to figure out. And very rarely does that happen non-violently. In the majority of democratic countries, you will find a violent history because that is how you get peace. In some sense. So that is what she sort of presents in this book and has such wonderful discussions by simply not saying that someone is right and someone is wrong. Then we are now at book 9. And I read one of the biggest English books ever written that is presented as one book. This is, they had to divide it into 2, just for simplicity. I had seen it as one unit, and that is Vikram Seth, A Suitable Boy. And this is actually very much in theme with Half of the Yellow Sun. A Suitable Boy is about mainly one family, but we follow so many other families that interact with them, and about India right after India got their independence. So talking about India in the 1950s, and what kind of country India wanted to be. Now, what I really enjoyed about A Suitable Boy is that rather than talking about what do we want to be from a political standpoint, and you do have that, so you do have a huge subplot on some kind of laws that were about who is going to own the land on the countryside. Interesting, very interesting what's going on there. I'm not going to delve too much into that. But what I really enjoyed with this book is that it talks about the discussions that they were having about what kind of country we wanted to be from a cultural perspective, from a societal perspective. So it's not necessarily the politicians, but it is the culture at large. He has a huge subplot about what kind of literature are we going to teach with? What are going to be the canon that we build on? So India was under British rule for so long, and the British had imported a lot of British literature, William Shakespeare, for example. And I love William Shakespeare. Absolutely such an important writer because he influenced so many, because he was imported, because the British were an imperial power. And then you sort of then have a lot of professors at the university who, of course, agree that William Shakespeare is important. Of course, they need to know that. But is that the beginning? Or should we focus on Indian authors? What kind of Indian authors? What kind of Indian stories? And another subplot that is probably the main plot, a lot of people will probably argue that will be the main plot, is of course women's position. The main character is a young girl who is courted by a lot of different men, and then she has to pick out a suitable boy to get married to. But what is a suitable boy? And who decides what is a suitable boy? And again, going back to what I said about Half of the Yellow Sun, there is so many difficult choices you have to make when you are creating your own country, especially if you're going to develop a democracy. And reading books that talk about that in an historical sense, so former countries that have had this, will give us a better understanding and a better language when we see this happening today. For example, what is now happening in Syria. I did not read these books because of what was going on with Syria, by the way, even if I'm now focusing a lot about Syria. it just happened to fit that way. Book number 10 is Singu by Edith Wharton. And this book, very short, lovely little read, is about a young women's club in the 1800s. That was very common if you didn't have to work. If you were upper class or upper middle class, you had women's clubs where you gathered and talked about everything and nothing that were deemed appropriate to talk about. And in one single club, one specific club in this, there is an author that they have all read, at least theoretically, they have all read, that wants to come and give a talk to them. And they think this is wonderful that this author is going to give them a talk. And he was going to talk about Singu. And of course, all of them know what Singu is, because all of them have read what this author has written. Of course they have. How dare you ask a question that we haven't read Singu? We don't know what Singu is about. The impropriety about it. Book 11. This was a book that I read for my Reading Around the World project. This was my representation for Mozambique. And this is Neighbours, The Story of a Murder by Lillian Montpellier. And talks about vicious attacks that were happening from South African terrorists on Mozambique country and people. And what I really enjoyed about this book, I'm not going to talk too much about it because I have a video, go and watch that video, is the characterizations, is how she does such a good job about describing the people that are involved with this on both sides. So you really get an understanding for who these people are, even if they are just people that you love to hate. For book number 12, I read Richard III, which is probably one of my new, well, not my favorite, because my favorite will always be Love's Labour's Lost, but Richard III is such an amazing, amazing play, and absolutely one of his best plays. I'm struggling to put into words just how wonderful Richard III is. But I think what I really enjoyed about it is that he starts the play with making you understand why the villain is as he is, and makes such a three-dimensional villain in a way that you really didn't think was possible. And I am going to count Henry VI Part 2 and 3 as one book, because it's one book here. Henry VI, I realized when reading all of the history plays, is one of the criminally unknown plays for William Shakespeare. And I squarely lay the blame for that on Henry VI Part 1. Henry VI Part 1 is a history play, as all of them are, but it's such as Henry VI Part 1 is so boring because it feels most like I'm now going to give a history lecture badly. And I do understand why people would start reading Henry VI, read Part 1, get bored, and then not read Part 2 and 3, which are brilliant when it comes to characters that are complex, that are three-dimensional, that you can question whether or not they're really good or really bad. Who should we trust? Who should we follow? Who should we root for? And especially the Queen in part 2 and 3 is such a wonderful character, as she is trying everything she can to protect her son, and is probably one of the most well-written, well-rounded characters, or at least female characters, that William Shakespeare ever wrote. And yes, I'm saying that, knowing about Juliet, knowing about Lady Macbeth, which is probably the most known of William Shakespeare's female characters. And the Queen in this play absolutely gives all of them a run for her money when she storms into battle to fight for her son's right to become king. Next, I want to talk about And Shall Machines Surrender? And I really tried to figure out how this author pronounces her name, and I struggled with finding it. Hopefully you can just look at the illustration. I'm going to give it a try. Benyanun Sridiankayev. She is an Indonesian author, and in her book, she is taking us into a future where AI is king, or in her example, queen. And there is two parallel worlds with robots in both of them, and where humans are hosts for artificial intelligence. And then there is a murder in sort of the lower robot world. And then there are certain people who have to figure out what is happening regarding this murder. And this is a queer science fiction book. It does center around two female presenting characters who end up falling in love. And what I so much enjoyed with this book is how she uses the example of these worlds to discuss this aspect of same-sex relationship and the room that people can have to have same-sex relationships based on what is open to them. And interestingly enough, because these two female presenting entities travel down into this lower world, they are therefore open to explore their attraction to one another in a way that wasn't available to them in the upper world. So being sort of in an outside perspective, because of other things, they are then open to explore their same-sex attraction. So wonderful interaction and wonderful use of the science fiction setting for that. Or you can just read it as the mystery it also is. You might be surprised on what's going on there. Book 15 is The Glass Speed Game by Hermann Hesse. This is also a science fiction book. I've read a lot of science fiction books this year. And this is more of a social science fiction, more than technological science fiction. So in this book, we are transformed into a world where if you are considered highly gifted, You are taken away from your family and placed into a school where you then get special training, very similar to how in the Middle Ages, the monks and the monasteries were where you did research and where you did protection of knowledge, develop of knowledge. They were the doctors, they were the scientists. But of course, to be able to do that, you needed to become a monk. So you needed to go into a world where you were separated from everyone else. You weren't allowed to get married. You weren't allowed to have children, at least on paper. And so Hermann Hesse uses this idea that happened in the Middle Ages and puts it into a new setting with a very similar aspect where sort of these are the brilliant minds of our society. And one of the things that they are used to be trained is, of course, this glass bead game. So the next book, number 16, is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. And this book is about humanity who notices that there is a spaceship above Earth. And what happens after they notice that this spaceship is above Earth? And what is going to happen when that spaceship sort of comes in regard to should humanity fight? Should humanity submit? Should humanity fight? Should humanity submit? Should they sort of think that this is good? Because what the aliens are promising them is a form of utopia. But of course, with all utopia, it is only possible if you do not have any freedoms. Book 17 till 20, so quite a lot of books, are from Isaac Asimov and is a part of his I, Robot series. So this is The Complete Robot. So this is one of the books, and where he sort of presents this alternative world. And what Isaac Asimov wanted to do was write a book about robots where robots didn't take over the world. And that's why he created these 3 laws of robotics. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So iRobot is both what his sort of collections of books in this setting is called, and also the first book. So the first book is a lot of short stories with some recurring characters. And then you have the books, The Cave of Steel, The Naked Sun, The Robot of Dawn, which are all books that is placed in the same world, but focuses on a detective. So it's the same character, unlike in this one, where it's different characters, who try to solve different murders and disappearance and all that good stuff. And this world is just so scrumptious. what I really enjoyed with it is that Isaac Asimov has created a world that believably talks with itself. So it believably builds on one another. It believably interacts with one another. So he has, for example, in The Cave of Steel, in The Naked Sun, and The Robot of Dawn, he has some Easter eggs where he refers to characters in the iRobot book. And he refers to characters within all of them. So it really does connect as a cohesive world, in a sense. So those are my books, 17 to 20. 21, I read The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. And this is about a maid who starts working for a maths professor who has lost his long-term memory. So he can just remember things in 80-minute chunks. And there is such a wonderful warmth between these two characters and the housekeeper's son that we only know as Root, because the professor thinks that his head is flat, like the root sign. And that's just what's so wonderful about that book. There is such a vulnerability in all of these characters, because of course you then have this housekeeper who has much lower status than the professor, is less educated than the professor. But because the professor doesn't have any more long-term memory, she is actually the person in power in that relationship, because she does remember things long-term. Book number 22, I was thinking about, should I go for Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens or Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad? And I went with Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This is a book about a man who is traveling down a river in Africa, trying to find the voice, which is a person who has traveled before in Africa and become a sensation back in England. And this is such a brilliant way of exploring discourse. Now, of course, Joseph Conrad, writing in the 1800s, had no idea what discourse was. It wasn't a word at that time, but he talks about the voice. And not just the voice as in the name of the person that he's looking for, but the voice. The voice that is telling him what is right and wrong and how he should be a good man in Victorian England, what it means to be a good man in Victorian England. And that is discourse. Just calling it the voice. Brilliant. Such a brilliant way of talking about how we are influenced by the society around us without not necessarily thinking about it and sort of reflecting on that aspect. For book number 23, I finally read The Vegetarian by Han Kang. Han Kang won the Nobel Prize of Literature this year. So, of course, I was inspired to read her book. And this is a book about a woman slowly losing her mental capacity and how that influences the people around her. So what I understand from South Korean culture is that mental health is a very taboo subject, at least when she was writing about it. And therefore, having a person that is mentally unwell and how she is met is filled with a lot of taboo. So that's some of the things that she wants to talk about in her book. And fittingly, my book 24 for books, my 24 books in 24, also talks about mental illness. And that is Benji by Kathy Esquel. This is for my Reading Around the World challenge. This is my book for Belize. And Benji is a man who is mentally ill and who is witness to a crime. And then everything that happens because of that, because Benji isn't necessarily the most credible witness. He doesn't really understand that he should tell people what he saw. And there is such a wonderful language in how Kathy presents the characters, not just Benji, but all of the people around Benji. You understand where they're coming from. You're understanding why they're thinking and doing the things that they are doing. And there are so many subplots that are interacting with one another in regarding to what is happening with Benji and his struggles with having witnessed what he had witnessed. So that was my last book for 24. What 24 books are your favorite in this year? Have you read any of the books that I have talked about? Do you think they are overhyped? Or do you think that maybe I have a point about picking them out of all of the books I've read this year? Let's talk about our favorite books. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.